Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we're gonna go through my tier list for the set 4 leaders. This video is sponsored by Card Markets, the biggest marketplace to buy and sell cards in Europe. Before we get into the tier list itself, I just would like to define a couple of ground rules on what I consider to be the different tiers. S tier is for the meta defining decks, the leaders to beat and to play around. A is leaders that are part of the meta and just generally powerful leaders. B is more situational but powerful in the right meta. It's also kind of leaders that are pretty competitive, but they are not just quite as competitive as tier 1. So there's so it's either leaders that are very powerful but situational, or leaders that are good but just are not right there. And C tier is leaders that can be good, they do some stuff that are pretty powerful, but overall they're really missing something to be competitive, like to be, so the nuance between B tier and C tier is like C tier, they are missing something to be at the top level, while C tier, they're missing something to even be considered to be consistently competitive, even though they can do powerful things. And D tier is not completely viable, and playing them puts you at a disadvantage compared to the other options. So, the nuance between A tier and S tier is A tier is part of the meta, but people don't really play around those leaders too much. While S tier is not only is it part of the meta, it's also defining the meta. People are literally just kind of like building their deck to beat those decks, basically. Obviously, we're gonna be focusing on the leaders, not really the deck they go with, but obviously that they go hand in hand. So this is obviously the tier list we're gonna be working on, and I'm gonna go through every pick one by one. Let me know in the comments if you like this way of doing it compared to my old ways when I was showing the tier list right away. And we're gonna start with Asajj Ventress. So Asajj is not terrible. She has an ability that can be powerful, but the ability is quite situational. One of the things that makes her ability quite situational is that it's bound to arena. So you need to play units on the and then use the ability and hope that it's going to be on the other side of this arena. So the fact that it's not cross arena but it's bound to arena makes the ability quite situational. Not only that, there needs to be a unit on your side that you are willing to damage, so then obviously the 1 damage needs to actually make a difference. I mean, obviously ping by itself is kind of good, but sometimes you have to lose initiative to get that ping going. So the ability is not bad, but I found it to be a little bit situational. Really, what is really holding back Asajj is her leader deploy. She has, in my opinion, one of the worst piloting leader deploy in the game. Deploy on 6 and +3/+4 stat line on deploy 6 is very, very bad if you compare it to other leaders. Compare this to, let's say, Vader, who gives +5/+5 on deploy 6, and also gives you two TIE fighters on top of this. This is really bad by comparison. The grid and the on attack is not particularly exciting. And obviously, if you deploy it on the ground, it's a full 6/6. That's a horrible stat line. So yeah, pretty much like a decent leader ability, but that is completely wasted by the fact that she has one of the worst leader deploy in the entire set, in my opinion. So for me, that's going to be a D tier for Asajj. I don't see any reason you should be playing this leader over other options available. And yeah, very simple in that. Moving on, we got Grand Admiral Thrawn. So if you watch my previous video, you already know that I rate this leader pretty high. I really think that the leader ability is extremely powerful, and there's tons of great synergies around it. It is great, of course, in an exploit deck because there's so many units that have on 1 defeated that leaves tokens behind, so getting twice those tokens is great. It's also a leader that performs really good in some aggro decks because there's a lot of units that have when defeated that deals damage to the base. It's also a leader that works on control, because there's loads of units that have when defeated that heals. And it's only going to get a leader that's going to get better over time as more when defeated units are printed. And even FFG is going to have to be careful because they can't just give when defeated effects that are too powerful with Thrawn because the Thrawn exists. So that's gonna have a lasting impact on the design of the card. I feel like the main downside of Grand Mail Thrawn is obviously the fact that as a leader deploy, he's not great. Full 7 for 6. But basically everything that I was expecting about Thrawn turned out to be true. Indeed, his leader deploy is very bad, but his leader's ability is so powerful that it makes up for that. And there's just so many ways to play it. So I don't necessarily think that he's going to be meta-defining, but he's definitely going to be part of the meta. And for me, this is an A tier for Thrawn. Next, we got Lando Calrissian. So Lando is interesting. His leader's ability is actually not bad. Because it's kind of like Luke's ability, but because you have to play the card at the same time, it doesn't waste you in action. And the fact that you can put a shield on any unit, and not only the unit that you just played, makes it so you can put the shield, you have a bit more flexibility on who you're giving the shield to. The constraint to having a space unit and a ground unit is kind of annoying, but I feel like the leader's ability is quite good. So yeah, definitely on the leader ability is definitely better than expected. I would say it has some advantage and inconvenience compared to Luke's ability, but overall, I feel like it's a give and take. Like you take the downside, take the upside. It might be better unless you're playing against control, but against control, giving out shield to units anyway is not really that useful. So, but yeah, really my big criticisms, of course, of Lando is the leader deploy. He's just way overpriced. If you compare this to, of course, an Obi-Wan that does something very similar, deploys on 6. And here, obviously, you can deploy it on as a pilot, but a pilot that costs 7, that is that expensive, is just so easy to counter. Your opponent just has any sort of upgrade removal or hard removal can really deal with him. So I think he deploys too late for what he does. So overall, once again, leader's ability is not terrible. It's not amazing. It does require you to have 2 units in play to make work, but I just feel like the leader deploy is just too bad. So for me, it's going to be D tier, and I'm going to put it even below a Sage. Next, we got Rose Tycho. So Rose Tycho is kind of like, so the ability is even more situational than the one of Obi-Wan, because it only works on vehicle. And you can only heal a unit that attack this phase. So it makes the ability just incredibly difficult to use. The leader deploy is fine because you get a full 6 for 5, which is a decent stat line. But then the attack ability is still too bad. The leader's ability is just incredibly bad and incredibly situational, constructed. It's basically more situational than Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan's ability was already kind of very situational. For me, that's going to be a D tier for Rose, even below Lando Calrissian. Next, we got Admiral Piet. So Admiral Piet is we know that resource cheating in Star Wars Limited is very powerful, and capital ships, especially thanks to set 3, is a categories of units that there's a lot of good units in that categories on almost every color excepted yellow, which is a kind of a big factor. So obviously we got in red we got Devastator, we got Ruthless Raiders. In blue we have the Corvus, the Avengers, the Annihilator, and we even have like the new Interdictor. And in yellow, you don't have access to great capital ship. I think the best one you're gonna have access to in yellow is gonna be the Invincible, and maybe sometimes you're also gonna be playing Radiant 7 because it costs 7, so you can curve it into Piet deploy. But the main advantage, of course, to play yellow is to play triple Dark Raid, and obviously in green you still have some great capital ship. We got the resupply ship, you got the Devastator, the old Devastator, which is incredible with Piet, and yeah, you got a leader that is widely playable in 3 different colors. Which of these 3 colors is the best remains to be seen, but I will be shocked if Admiral Piet is not going to be part of the meta, and he's going to be a leader that's going to require a very specific answer to beat, because this ability to just cheat out a massive ship turn after turn after turn after turn is incredible. The fact that he deploys on 5 and gives an even bigger discount when he's deployed and has 7 health, which means that he's not easy to kill. that is incredible. Amyopia not only is very powerful as a leader's ability, but also as a leader deploy really makes the capital ship even powerful, and you can even sometimes drop multiple capital ship in one turn. And we have the MT30, which is a capital that plays 5 that costs 5 that you can discount. We got the Corvus. We got so it just like his ability. You play a turn 1 play, you play a ramp, and then you can start dropping massive capital ship turn after turn after turn super early on in the game. You can finish game very early. You can play aggro if you want. You can play control. It's just very, very powerful and very, very difficult to counter. And it's going to require specific answers to counter. You're going to have to find ways to snipe Piet as they come out. You're going to have to find ways to deal with those massive capital ships in your deck. And the combination of him being very powerful and him requires very specific answers to beat properly, for me, is deserving an S tier. I think he's going to be a leader that's going to be is going to be an important part of the meta, and he's going to have an influence on the meta. He's going to be meta defining to some extent. Next, we got Darth Vader. So Darth Vader is a very interesting leader. First of all, he has, in my opinion, the best token generation ability in the entire game. Being able to generate a 1/1 in space for free is very powerful, and the condition to do this is not difficult at all. You just need to have attacked with a non-token vehicle, which is not that difficult to do at all, especially if you swarm. So it's a pretty powerful ability, very deceivingly powerful. And there's obviously quite a few ways to take advantage of those large amount of unit. And Darth Vader combines a pretty decent leader's ability with a very powerful leader deploy. In my opinion, he's one of the best leader deploy in the game. As you deploy on 6, yes, but the +5/+5 stat line is really, really strong. And not only that, you're getting 2 TIE fighters, so even if your Darth Vader gets answered, he's very powerful. Right now, there's 2 main blockers for Vader as a leader. The fact that your opponent can very easily kill those TIE fighters. Like, there's certain decks and certain things that do a really good job. So we talk about War Juggernaut that is just capable of killing a bunch of units, IG-2000. Swarming swarm strategies are still not very good in Star Wars Unlimited, unfortunately, because FFG keeps printing super efficient answers to those swarm strategies. So swarm strategies have never managed to really be so good in Star Wars Unlimited because there's just too many strong counters to it. And that's the big problem with Vader. And the other problem, of course, is that he's a big leader deploy that can be countered with something as simple as a confiscate. So I think they're just very strong. I just think that it needs a specific meta to work, and it will be a meta where people don't run ways to kill like small swarming units, and the other one would be a meta where people don't run anti-upgrade. And if those 2 conditions happen, then I think this leader can be quite good, so I'm going to put this in B tier. Next, we got Admiral Aldo. So Admiral Aldo is there's a resistance archetype in the set. Unfortunately, it's still underdeveloped. We still don't have this critical mass of resistance card that allows you to build a deck. And also keep in mind that as we're getting more and more expansion, other decks are getting stronger and stronger. So we need even more support for new archetypes to really emerge. So FFG really need to push those archetypes really, really hard for them to be competitive, because they have so much to catch up on. Okay, there's a few good resistance cards from previous sets, but overall resistance is still a trait that is very far behind compared to something like Rebels, so or even Underworld. So the problem, that's the first problem with Aldo. The second problem is like durability is really, really bad. So the fact that so she can the fact that she has to spend resources to give a temporary buff, and you can't even attack with that unit. That just is quite situational. And the fact that, of course, it's limited to resistance. So the ability it's not terrible, right? It's quite flexible. It's not, if you're playing a resistance deck, it's relatively easy to use, but it's quite slow because you have to give the buff and then the unit has to attack. The +2 health really doesn't matter. It's really mostly about the +2 attack. The +2 health doesn't matter because obviously the +2 bonus will phase out at the end of the turn, and whatever damage unit have it will have to die as a result. And then obviously the other problem is the leader deploy. The ability does not get better really, and the stat line is awful. 3-8 is not what you're looking for so basically 3-8 is a stat line that you are happy with if you want your leader to stay alive. But since her leader ability is not really getting much better after she deploys, basically that means that you don't really care if she lives or dies, because the ability is kind of the same. And the fact that she only has 3 attacks means that she's not really much of a threat, means that you don't really care. So the health really matters whenever there's something to protect, but there's nothing to protect here. It's just really, really bad, and the deploy 6 is terrible. So yeah, Animal Model is pretty bad. I'm gonna put her in D tier. I'm gonna put it below Lando. I'm gonna put it below Rose Tycho. I think she's really one of the worst leaders in the game. Next we got Wedge. So I had high hopes for Wedge, but it turns out that the kind of playstyle that Wedge makes you play is very, very annoying, because here's the thing: you got to play like units, and then you have to put pilots on them. And the problem is that unless you're playing Chewbacca, units that are piloted are very vulnerable. There's like waylays and stuff. We're also in a meta where killing a 3 health unit in space has never been so easy. Mostly, of course, with ping plus triple dark raid. We had, of course, the new resistance ship, the Fireball from Kazuda, that can come in and kill your 3 health units, and you can't do anything about it. People can also play, Piet can play the Corona ship, the 3-5 on turn 1. Well, this actually doesn't quite work. But there's also, of course, all the hand deck that can play Falcons on turn 1. Yeah, it's just risky to, of course, your opponent just go power the dark side, the merciless contest. There's just so many ways to counter just turn 1 play, and then you put a pilot on it. Especially then, if you have to put the pilot, you have to lose initiative. So the risk, it's just very, very risky to go for a play like this. As a leader deploy, Wedge is fine. 3+3+4, 5 on pilot is fine, but the ability doesn't get much stronger, and I think there are better options as far as like early deploys. There's basically leaders that do +3+3 deploy on 4. So what would you want to have +3+4 on 5? So it's kind of like a bit of a mess in terms of. So the deployment is not particularly good. The leader's ability is force you to play into a playstyle and a deck that is very, very risky. There's of course the situation where you got your units, you get your pilots. Sometimes you draw your pilot without drawing your units, so you have to play your pilot as units, and then the deck just becomes very, very underpowered. So basically, my experience with Wedge is like it's very easy to counter. It's it's relatively inconsistent. I mean, you got a lot of redundancy, but you're really looking for specific kind of pilots and specific matchup. So I just didn't have a good experience with it. I just found it to be also like it's very, very bad against Django. You put pilots on your units, and then they get tapped down by Django's ability. So all those factors combined makes Wedge a relatively unimpressive leader. So it's really missing something to be good. Obviously, there are strong stuff going on. If your opponent doesn't have the right answer, you can really those pilots can really get out of control, and the fact that you get them cheaper allows you to kind of like make them bigger before they have the time to be traded with. So I'm not going to put this in D tier, but I've been relatively unimpressed by Wedge. I think he's I think he's just too easy to counter, and there's just better things to do if you want to play an aggro deck in those colors. Next we got Boba Fett leader. So as I predicted the first time I saw the card, which was at the very beginning of the set, the leader's ability is not amazing. Like, it gives you some extra damage here and there, which is cute, but it's not super impactful, especially if you compare this to something like a Django. The leader deploy though is kind of nice. It goes on deploy and deal 4 indirect damage. Full damage, sorry, it's not indirect damage. So it's like a mini barrage when it deploys. +4/+4, but deploys on 6 is relatively annoying. And the thing is, your opponent, once again, can relatively kind of counteract this if he knows that this mini barrage thing is going to be a problem. it can very easily try to keep the space bolt clean to prevent you from deploying Boba. Obviously, Boba is not bad. Boba enables you to play Boba Fett armor, which is nice, but in the meantime, Boba Fett armor is really so much better when you gotta deploy the leaders deploys on 5, and also the fact that you most likely want to play this as a leader upgrade means that you cannot play the Boba Fett armor on the spaceship, so that doesn't really work. So it's only if you're playing it on the ground, which is not something you want to do. So my opinion about Boba is relatively straightforward. If you want to play an indirect damage deck that plays yellow, red, black, which is the colors that you want to play Boba in anyways, you are far better off just running Django, because the tap ability on the ping is so much more relevant than what Boba can offer, and the leader deploy is also much better. So he's not bad, but there's just better things to do. So I'm going to put it basically C tier. He's not bad, as I said, but there's just like better things to do, I think. You're just better off playing Django. That's kind of the sad story. Then we got Captain Phasma. So Captain Phasma has the same problem as Aldo. Is like she requires you to play Forced Order cards, and there's just not that many. There's not that critical mass of Forced Order card in the game yet to make a real powerful deck. Once you get that, the ability is kind of good, because it's if you can play Forced Order card every turn, then it's basically Sabine but just one side, and then you deploy, you get a 4/6. And the 4/6 ability is quite nice as well. You get to ping, and you get to damage the base. Deploys on 5, not as good as Sabine, but I think that you got other advantages. So right now, as it stands, obviously there's no reason to play Phasma. It's just the deck building constraint is just too big. But she's definitely better than Aldo by a lot. So I'm gonna put it at the top of D tier. I think she has some potential for the future if we get that critical mass of Forced Order card, but even whenever we get that, I still don't think she's going to be that amazing, because as I said, Sabine is pretty much almost as good, if not better than her, because she deploys on 4, and she has no restriction on the card that she wants to play. She can play anything she wants. So that's going to be a problem, of course, the comparison between the two. Obviously, this isn't villainy. Access to a different card pool. Right now, red-black is not as good as red-white, but this can change, so maybe in the future, but for now, not good. Then we got Major Von Reg. So my thought process with Major Von Reg is that I don't like the leader's ability. I think the leader's ability is very weak. The fact that it forces you to be used before you get to, after you get to play a card is very awkward, because generally you want to attack with your unit first, and then you want to play your card, and in this case you don't benefit from the +1 bonus attack. If you want to benefit from the +1 bonus attack, you need to play the card first, and then buff the vehicle. So it's just really awkward, and it makes it very difficult to use that ability. It makes it very difficult. So the ability is basically almost useless. It's very rare that you're going to be willing to take the risk to use that ability, basically. So that's kind of a major issue for the leader. What I love about the leader is the leader deploy. Obviously, whenever you're playing an aggro deck and you get to deploy on 4 and can give +3/+3 with the leader's ability, that is, in my opinion, very, very strong. So love the leader ability. Really don't like. Really like the leader deploy, really don't like the leader ability. Unfortunately, to be competitive, you kind of need both things. So I don't think it's unplayable. I don't think it's terrible. I'm going to put this as C tier. Once again, red-black doesn't have a lot of competition as far as like good leaders. So that's something going in favor. So you can build like a major Von Reg leader, and the leader deploy is really, really strong. Unfortunately, the leader not having a good leader ability is really holding the leader back, in my opinion. And once again, red-black is still not a great color combination for aggressive deck, at least for now. It's still an awkward color that is kind of split between aggro and control options. And most red-black decks you're gonna see in the meta mostly play yellow-black, basically. And the red-black is just a support color. Moving on, we got the new Luke Skywalker. So it's an interesting leader, but it has a couple of weaknesses. So the first weakness that it has is like you need to be able to attack with a fighter to be able to benefit from dealing a damage to a unit. This is very powerful with combination with Starkintown, but the problem is like if you want to use Starkintown with Luke, then you have to be running double red, which as we know is not a color combination that is particularly powerful. So that's kind of the major issue with Luke. Another issue is that you need to be attacking with a fighter. So, and that's in today's meta, preventing a turn 1 play in space to attack is relatively easy. Obviously, we have all the removals, the power dioxide, the mercenaries contest, the open fire, all those removals that will prevent the fighter from attacking, but there's also plenty of other removals, other units that are capable of interacting on turn 1 with your space units. As I said, we got the Millennium Falcon that can, on turn 1, that can just kill your units. The old Millennium Falcon, if you're playing with Han. You got the Fireball from Kazudad, which is... So, getting the ability off is not that easy to do early on in the game, which is really where you want this ability to actually kick in. So, it's a good ability, but it's not, like, amazing. And then the leader deploy is coming in at 6 is a big problem. And, okay, the unit cannot be defeated by enemy card ability, the upgrades, so it doesn't get hard countered by a confiscate, which is nice. But, in the other hand, it deploys relatively late, and your opponent can really play around the leader by keeping the space unit clear, and then if you have to deploy leader on the ground, then it becomes a lot worse. It's not a bad leader, as I said, if you can manage to deploy leader as Luke as a leader on a unit and get the unit out of control. If you can get the ability off and you start it down early on in the game, it's very powerful. It does really powerful things, but overall, it's a leader that needs to that gets countered to by a bit too many things. So here in this one, I really don't know if I want to put this at the bottom of B tier or the top of C tier. I'm gonna put it at the top of C tier for now, and I'll see if I bump it up to B tier later on. Then we got Poe Dameron. So Poe Dameron is another leader that disappointed me quite a bit. One, something that I've realized is that he's very powerful if you happen to have eject in hand, but if you don't, basically what your opponent can do is it can basically let you use your ability on a unit, and then once the Poe Dameron is comes down as an upgrade, your opponent, you cannot deploy Poe Dameron anymore. So you just get that leader, this awkward leader that is basically as an upgrade, and really can't do much with it because obviously +2/+1 upgrade for 1 is nice, but it's not as good as getting a 4/6 for 5. So you come down sometime in situations where if you know that you have no way to spend that upgrade, you kind of don't want to use it, so then you can deploy your leader. And then 4/6 for 5 with no ability is not exactly an exciting leader either. So basically the only way Poe Dameron is actually good is if you have a way to suicide him, either using heroic sacrifice or once again a way to eject him. So that makes the leader very conditional to really draw specific cards to actually work. And not only that, it's also a leader that's quite easy to counter because once again the eject play can be countered by once again I've talked about it earlier, but being overly reliant on a turn 1 play in space is not so great in this meta where there are plenty of decks that can simply kill your turn 1 in space without any problem, or just take the initiative and kill your turn 1 play in space anyway. So it's being overly reliant on having a turn 1 play to stay can be difficult. With that being said, whenever he gets going, he's very, very powerful. If you happen to be able to sacrifice the Poe or to eject him, the deck becomes really, really, really powerful. So, the deck becomes really powerful. So, as we were expecting, of course, the 4/6 on turn 2 that makes you draw a card, that puts ton of pressure on your opponent. That remains a very powerful combo. So he's not as good as I was expecting, but he's still quite good. So for me, I'm gonna put it in B tier. So depending on the meta, I could see Poe being a competitive leader. Then we got Admiral Trench. So Admiral Trench is a very interesting leader. So basically, unfortunately, FFG did not give us really a lot of support for his ability, because obviously there's not a lot of ways to take advantage of the discard pile. We have basically Palpatine's Return, but that's basically about it. That's the only way you can really take advantage and really allow you to play like a force unit with a 2 discount. Unfortunately, not really any powerful force units in yellow color, so yellow color is also pretty awkward there. I think it's a leader that would have been more powerful if it would have been in green, or it would have been in red, because then you would have been able to play it in a deck that has a lot more force, expensive unit to take advantage of Palp's Returns. As far as like if you want to play a Palp's Returns deck, Trench is definitely better than Aphra. So Trench is kind of an interesting leader because he's kind of in a similar spot than Aphra is. Aphra was played as a hard control leader that has this ability to kind of empty its deck and then go for like a restock loop, which I think was terrible. I think that was basically just you were just ended up with an underpowered version of a blue, yellow, black deck if you were playing that, and I made this point many times in the past. I think Admiral Trench does a much better job at being this deck, because in the context of a control deck, the recursive deployment is very, very powerful. And being able to do so, basically from 6 resource onward, getting a 3 resource force 5 that draws you a card when it comes to play, and then mill you a bunch of cards, which we know is an advantage if you're going to get toward the restock loop. That's very, very powerful. And obviously the ability to discard and draw a card is another way you can mill yourself by 1 every turn, but here you get to decide which card you're discarding, and therefore you are sculpting yourself a better hand every time that happens, as opposed to Aphra, where you don't get to decide, it's just the card getting discarded right away. So Aphra does have a free deployment, but our stats are so underwhelming that I don't think it really matters that much. And while Trench can be deployed again and again. So if you're going to be playing a hard control that likes to self-mill and stuff, Admiral Trench is basically just strictly better. That I wouldn't say strictly better, but he's definitely better than Aphra in my opinion. In my opinion, Trench, if you want to build a hard control deck that destroys other hard control deck, I think Trench is actually a very good option. I think he might be one of the strongest anti-control leader in the game. The problem is, like, because of its deployment, to be able to just deploy over and over again for 3 is just insane. But with all that being said, the problem is, like, I don't really think this deck exists. This deck will do anything against other decks. That's the problem. So Trench is a very specialized leader. I can see a very weird environment where it would be pretty strong, but obviously this is not. We are currently in a meta that is extremely aggressive, and I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. So this is definitely not the right environment for Trench, but it does something pretty unique that other leaders don't do, and I think that there's a meta where it can be quite strong. And for that reason, unfortunately, that if this was kind of like an environment that was likely to be the case, I would have put him in B tier. But since it's an environment that is very, very unlikely to come to place, because FFG have already said that they wanted to limit hard control decks and to make sure they're not top of the meta, which means that it's very unlikely that Trench will ever gonna be in an environment where he's actually good. So for that reason, I'm gonna put it in C tier. So then we got Rio Durant. So Rio Durant is interesting. His ability is nice, but the problem is, like, it's definitely an aggro ability, and aggro ability that requires you to spend the resources to be used are usually pretty bad. And the reason for it is because whenever you're playing aggro, you're playing, generally speaking, very, very aggressively on curve, and you don't really have resources to spare. And here's the reason: the bonus is not amazing, +1 attack is not great, and Saboteur is only situationally powerful. So the leader's ability is not completely useless, but it's definitely better than Von Reg, Major Von Reg's ability, but not as powerful. as a pilot leader, is nice because he gives the unit Saboteur, which can be very relevant, and the +3/+5 stat line is really good. So he's one of the, in my opinion, he's the best, one of the best pilot leaders that deploys on 5. But unfortunately, that gets countered, of course, by confiscate, that kind of thing. I would much rather play Major Durang for the leader deployment, I think. So he has just a better leader deployment. So yeah, if I had to compare it to Rio Durant, I would say Rio Durant has a worse leader ability, but has a better leader deploy. So all in all, they kind of cancel each other out. And I'm gonna put it in the CG. I'm gonna put Major Van Reg a little bit higher on this list, yeah, something like this. And I'm gonna put Rio Durant around this area. Then we got Admiral Akbar. So Admiral Akbar is as bad as we were expecting. His leader ability is very bad because you have to, it's a lot of work to get some X-Wing token. You have to pay resources, you have to exhaust one of your own units. So if you use the ability on your own unit, it's pretty bad. If you use the ability on the opponent unit, it's also pretty bad. So it has the flexibility, but in the meantime, regardless on how you want to use the ability, it's very, very weak. Its support cards are really bad, and his leader deploy is absolutely horrendous because, once again, same problem as with Aldo, you get a 3/8 stat line, which is really good if you want to stay alive, but the ability is so bad that it really don't care about Akbar staying alive for longer. Also, the yellow color is not really the best color for him. It would have been much better in command, where it's kind of like the more swarmy playstyle you get to use. And the play on 6 is obviously terrible. So Admiral Akbar is probably the worst leader of this set in my opinion. So I'm putting the D tier. Then we got Han Solo, Never Tell Me the Odds. There's a lot of things to like about this leader. The leader's ability is a lot better than what I initially anticipated. The fact that you get to the +1 attack bonus, like it's not that difficult to build a deck where about 80 to 90% of the deck is made out of odd cost card. And the fact that you get to reveal the card first and then attack means that you can see if you're getting the bonus, and then from that point you can make a decision on whether you want to attack that unit to kill it, or whether you just want to go to base or whatever, if you don't have the bonus. So that's very nice. There's also a lot of synergies with being able to know the top card of your deck. You can play with this with Foresight to be able to draw a card very easily. You can play this with C3PO to get to draw cards very easily. So there's a lot of cool things to like about this leader. You can play it with I forgot the name. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that the being able to see the top card of your deck is by itself very valuable. So, and it's of course a free ability. And once again, +1 attack can give you very favorable trades and really helps you to dominate the early game. The leader deploy is no joke either. You get a +3/+4 in space as a pilot leader, and then you get to ready a bunch of resources. You're going to be able to ready at least 1 resources, but realistically, you're going to be able to ready about 2 resources whenever you do it, which is very, very nice. So that can give you some pretty sick turns. And even if you don't have any units, a 3/7 for 5 is on the ground is actually a pretty good stat line as well. So even if you don't have anything to deploy into, 3/4 stat line is not bad. So I like Han Solo. He doesn't do anything particularly broken, but he's just a very well-rounded leader, good leader ability, good deploy, a couple of cool synergies. So I actually like him very much. Why is it not going to be very high in this tier list? I think it's not going to be very high because, once again, we need to be in a meta that is very about like trading. I think the meta is just a little bit too fast for him. He really wants a meta where that is very grindy, where you can take advantage of the C3PO to draw a bunch of cards. You want to be able to be trading early on. Like it's not really, we're not really feel like it is not really in the right meta yet for Han Solo. So I'm gonna put in a B tier. He's good, and obviously the fact that, once again, upgrade removal, just get rid of pilots is kind of a big bummer as well. So I'm gonna put him in B tier. I think he's competitive. I just think that he's not gonna be like part of like he's gonna be a tier 3 deck, not really tier 2 or tier 1 decks. So that's kind of how I feel about him. Also, another factor, of course, with Han Solo is that the competition for cunning heroism leaders is very, very tough. Basically, between Kazuda, which we're going to talk about soon, and Han Solo, the first Han Solo, the competition for, and also Quinlan, the competition in this color combination is extremely tough, and it can be sometimes difficult to justify running Han Solo. Also, having to run a deck that has all odds is very deck building constrained. So those are really the big factors that are holding back Han Solo, in my opinion. Then we got the last but not least, the Kazuda Xiono, best pilot in the galaxy apparently. And this leader is amazing. So this leader is amazing simply because it combines the two things you want for a good leader: is a good leader ability and a great leader deploy. So his leader ability, of course, doesn't do anything on its own, but it enables you to play a lot of units that are very powerful. So we talked about, of course, Fireball, which is such an amazing card against all those leaders that want to have like a 2/3 spaceship on turn 1 and can counter those, stay alive, and then leave right away from turn 1 is just incredible. So you got Fireball, you get of course you get to disable the disadvantage of you get a 4/4 ambush, which is pretty incredible against certain decks. You of course, and then you get the 80 Auler, which is a 4/5 for 3 in space. And then you got a bunch of great other older cards that you get to disable their downside. The most famous one is probably Minion Falcon, that becomes just a 3/4 for 3 that just doesn't that just comes into play ready. That's all those cards are just completely absurd when their downsides are turned off by Kazuda's ability. And not only that, even in different colors, there are great cards you can play Kazuda in red. You can turn off the downside of Heroic Sacrifice or Trench Run. So those both becomes a +2 +0 for one that draws you a card. The other one becomes a +4 +0 on fighters, that has no downside. So turning off the downside makes Kazuda Red a very strong aggro deck. In double yellows, there's obviously a lot of amazing cards for tempo, aggro tempo style of deck. And even in blue, there's some interesting thing going on with obviously very strong Security Complex has always been a great base for an aggro blue deck. It's just that we haven't seen any aggro blue deck being played so far. And then you get, of course, the Shuttle, that is a 3/5 for 2 that doesn't have that cannot attack, but you can turn off the downside. You get a 3/5 for 2 in space on turn 1, which is completely absurd. So you get a lot of good things going on with Kazuda, a lot of strong synergies. And then the leader deploy is also very good because you get yourself, similarly to Von Reg, you get yourself a +3/+3 on a unit as early as turn 3. And it's very, like, leaders that deploys late, they have two downsides. They get out countered by Confiscate and Upgrade Removal. And they also have the downside is, like, because they take so long to come in play, the opponent has the options to kind of clear the space arena and prevent you from having anything to deploy into. But that's very difficult to do on a leader that deployed that early, because your opponent is going to go turn 1 space unit, turn 2 space units, turn 3 space units. How are you supposed to prevent Kazuda from deploying, especially when some of those space units actually come into play ready, like Falcon? It's almost impossible to prevent Kazuda from being able to deploy into something and give like a massive attack bonus. And now that unit is also considered a leader, so that means there's a lot of removal that actually don't work on it. And that can be just very powerful. So Kazuda is just, in my opinion, the best aggro leader in the set. And it is, in my opinion, the best leader in this set. So I'm gonna rate it over Piet. I think people are gonna have to play around Kazuda. And I didn't even talk about the thing that Kazuda can actually do in terms of turning off other existing leaders. Like, for example, Kazuda ability just on its own will turn off all the bounties. So if you're playing against Bosk, basically Kazuda will turn off everything. It's a very strong deck against, if you play the double yellow version, you're very strong deck against control, you get loads of selective discard. It's really good against aggro because double yellow also gives you access to exhaust effects like Cunning, that are really good at racing. So he's kind of like, imagine Kazuda more kind of like as a hand one, but more all in on the tempo plan, but doesn't have this kind of value game plan. So it is a very different deck, and in my opinion, it is a very powerful deck. And we don't even know which version of the deck is better, because just like Piet, there's multiple ways of running it, and there's and all those options are pretty strong. So I really like Kazuda, and he's, in my opinion, the best leader in the set, and it is definitely going to be part of the meta. Also, just wanted to let you know that if you want to pick up a showcase version of Kazuda, it currently goes on card market for about 155 euros, so basically less than 200 euro for what I consider to be the best leader in the set. Is a kind of a good price if you ask me. So check it out if you're interested. So this is currently my tier list. So there's a couple of things that I could see change. Like I can see a couple of those leaders going back to A tier depending on the meta. Luke Skywalker is kind of still debatable whether I want this on low B tier, on top C tier. So this one is a little bit kind of like, I'm not sure where I want to put him, but I'm gonna keep it on top of C tier. And then there's the leaders at the bottom here. I'm fairly confident are not gonna see competitive play, at least not anytime soon. They're not desperate calls. There's a couple of leaders that I can see depending on what kind of things gets revealed, like Captain Phasma, maybe Rose Tycho. Maybe there's a way she could be better. And yeah, but that's basically kind of how I feel. Overall, leader pilots are a little bit of a letdown because obviously on how easy they are to counter. Even though in some situations, they are difficult to rank, right? Because there are situations where they just win the game for you, but there's situations where they just don't do anything. So they're very difficult to rank. The fact that we are kind of in a Django meta obviously is a downside for pilots, because you get to pilots to a unit and then unit gets tapped down. That's a huge tempo swing against you. But yeah, nevertheless, I think this is a very cool list. There's a lot of good leaders in the set. As I said, there's at least 6 leaders that I think have the potential to see significant amount of competitive play, and that's already pretty good. So it's already better than in a lot of other sets. So that's really cool. So in terms of leaders, it's also quite difficult to rank because I don't think there's any leaders that is like obviously the best. Kazuda is, in my view, the best leader, but it's not by a lot. It's not like if you compare this to Django, which was by far the best leaders in set 3, and you got Han 2, which was by far the best leader in set 2. This time around, it's a little bit more kind of like difficult to rank. In any case, I hope you guys enjoyed that video, and if you agree or disagree, let me know, and I'll see you next time.